experienced it. It really has to do a lot with the people on the back wall. These people who keep coming back every year. I feel like they know something about this program, you know? They know something about what Rent a Retreat can do. They know that if we open ourselves up to God, if we open ourselves up to each other, no matter whether we're turned up to 11 or somewhere in the middle, we know that God will do something amazing with that, and that we'll get to catch a glimpse of what the church has been calling for a long time, the kingdom of God. And I think that's what I'm so excited about this morning. That's what I've been thinking about for the past couple weeks as I've been preparing to come here and talk to you. Now, if you've looked at your name cards or listened to Mike or Andy, I think, you know that we're going to be talking about joy this week. And I want to start by sharing a verse from the Bible with you. Now, the word Bible really means collection of books. There's a lot of books in the Bible, spanning the course of thousands of years. Oral histories that span the course of tens of thousands of years. And of the books of the Bible, we have 66 that we use in our Bible. 13 of those books were written by a guy named Paul. And Paul was one of these amazing men who traveled all over his area, helping to inspire and encourage the first generation of the Christian church, something that we're a part of today. And so in one of his letters to a church in a neighboring town, the Church of Philippi, he sends 3 pieces of advice. And I'm going to be talking about these pieces of advice. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. Then he says, be anxious for nothing. Don't be worried about anything. And then he says, be thankful for everything. So we're here to talk about joy, and I would say that joy is an idea. It's an idea that can be hard to put your finger on at times. And so you're going to hear me talk about joy, and you're going to hear Keith and Carrie and Rob talk about joy. You're going to hear your leaders talk about joy, and everyone in your cabin. You're going to hear a lot of different perspectives on what joy is. Because it's hard to put our finger on it at times. Joy is that idea. And if joy is this idea, this feeling, the word I just used, rejoice, well, that's an action word. That's the verb of joy. And so this morning I want to talk to you about that idea, this actionable joy that we can set in motion. A joy that maybe we can make a choice for. I'm really interested in that. We just celebrated the season of joy, Christmas, and I was at a party at that guy's house, Mr. Seymour. Yep, thank you. Yeah. One night, and we got to talking about what our favorite gifts were when we were children. All right? Now, I've celebrated 37 Christmases. That's a lot of gifts. But oddly enough, I knew immediately what my favorite gift was. Show him the picture, Jackson. There it is. That's me as I think a 7-year-old up there. And if you can't see what I'm holding up, it is a poster with a bunch of fish on it, right? Yeah. Yeah. Hold up a poster, and I mean, just look at those teeth. Walk right through those buck teeth. But I mean, you can't deny it. Am I happy or what?
Yeah, man.
I am holding a $2 piece of paper. Maybe. This is the early 90s. It might have cost $2. My dad was probably walking through a bookstore or Kmart, and he said, you know, I think I'll get that poster for Scott. And you see, when I was a kid, I knew that my mom got most of my gifts. I was aware of that because I knew my parents pretty well. But I knew my dad got me that one. Because you see, my dad and I, we loved to fish. My dad taught me how to fish when I was a kid. And I just love looking at that picture. But you know what I love about this picture the most? I love the picture that it includes my dad. You can't see his face really good, but see if you can. He's looking down at me. Just a candid moment. And there's something in his look. Something that I've only recently started to be able to understand. I really like that picture. We're going to fast forward. I'm going to show you one more picture right now. This is me way cooler. There you go. That's the reaction I was hoping for. Yeah, I look a little bit winded, obviously. And it was an exhilarating moment. That is to this day the largest largemouth bass I've ever caught. It's about 9.5 pounds. And it was caught in a little pond right behind my house. Something amazing happened when I caught that fish. My dad was fishing with me. He was on the other side of the pond. And he saw me wrestling this fish in. And he dropped his rod and reel, and he ran as fast as he could around the pond to see it. And when he got over there, he said, "Hold on, son." Now, this was the days before we had iPhones and cameras on all of our devices. And he said, "I'm going to run up to the house and get a camera." So he sprinted, my dad did, as fast as he could to the house, which was 250 yards away. Got a little disposable camera. I'm down there trying to, keep the fish alive. We weren't going to keep it or anything. And he runs back down. He says, hold it up. Let's get a picture. I don't want to forget this moment. I want to hold on to it. And I remember I'm looking at my dad, and I think he's more nervous than I am. He's so filled with excitement. And I think I'm starting to learn a little bit something about joy, maybe. Let's take that picture down. I have another story about fishing that happened just a few short years ago. My dad lives outside of Winston-Salem near the University of Wake Forest, and he went to Clemson University, and so every 2 years Clemson's football team comes up to Winston-Salem to play football. And so 2 years ago he said, "Come on up to the home, son. We'll go see a football game together." I said, "That sounds good." So I drove up on a Friday night, and on Saturday morning I woke up and I said to Dad, "Dad, let's go fishing. Let's go fishing in the river. We never go fishing in the river. We're always in the pond out back. Let's go down to the river." So we loaded up in the pickup truck and we drove down to the Yadkin River. And we walked out into the waters. It's October, it's kind of cold, and we fished. And we didn't catch anything. Fished for a couple hours, didn't catch anything, and I was getting frustrated because I'm one of those fishing kind of people that likes to catch fish when I fish. And I know, go figure. And I found this rock sitting in the middle of this river. Now, the Yadkin River is one of the oldest rivers in the world. And I said, "Let's go sit on that rock and just talk for a minute, Dad." And so we went over there and we talked for a moment. After we had talked, I said, "Hey, Dad, throw your line on the other side of that ledge over there. It just looks like a fishy place. When you fish long enough, you start to think that places look fishy." And so Dad said, "All right." He threw his line over there, and immediately, this enormous 4 or 5 pound smallmouth bass just devoured his fly. But then something amazing happened that I was not expecting. My dad, in that frenzied moment, did something that he hadn't done since I was probably 6 years old. He said, "Here, son, you take it. You reel it in." That's what Dad used to do when I was a kid. We'd hook a fish, and he would give me the reel and the rod because he wanted me to have the joy of bringing it in. Well, he shouldn't have done that because the fish slipped the hook when he gave me the rod. But later on that day, after all the activities of the day, I was driving home, driving back to Waynesville, and it started to occur to me, something that I hadn't thought about, that I get a lot of joy from fishing with my dad. And my dad gets a lot of joy from fishing with me. But it really doesn't have anything to do with the fish. When we catch a fish, it's an amazing moment. We're very happy. Sometimes we're just surprised at how big these things can be. But I started to remember as I was driving home those countless hours sitting on the banks of a river, sitting in a john boat, just sitting and talking when the fish weren't biting. And I realized that those were the moments that I cherished the most. Those were the moments that gave me the most joy, that sometimes made me tear up a little bit. So Paul tells us, rejoice in the Lord, not sometimes, not just when you got a fish on the line. Paul tells us, make joy all the time. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to say, don't be anxious about anything. Now, I don't have to tell you in this room that there's a lot of things to be anxious about. Life sends anxieties to us every single day. It's how we respond to them, I think, that matters. As you may have picked up on, my family is a Clemson family. We've been a Clemson family for as long as I've been alive. My whole family went to Clemson. We have celebrated all of Clemson's victories, and mostly, when I was younger, a lot of losses. So we've come full circle there. And so how many of you know Dabo Swinney, the coach at Clemson? There you go, some of you. You either like him or you don't, and that's totally understandable. But whenever Dabo Swinney talks, people listen. And he tells this amazing story. He tells this amazing story about the first year when he won his first national championship. What was that, 2 or 3 years ago? And Deshaun Watson was the quarterback. And he tells this beautiful story about the day that Pittsburgh came to town to play Clemson. And you know what happened? His whole family had come to town that day. He had big plans, big dreams for the day. What they were going to do was Clemson was going to play this football game. They were going to win the football game. They were supposed to. And then the whole family's going to come over to the house for a cookout. And then the next day they're going to go to church together. And they're going to see his youngest son be baptized. Had a whole plan, and everything was going great and according to plan. Everyone was in town until that last-second field goal soared through the uprights and gave the best team in the country an unlikely defeat. Something they hadn't been expecting. And then that's what everything became about then. It only takes one thing to go wrong sometime to throw us off track, to send us into the underworld, into the belly of the beast. That's what happened to Dabo then. The whole thing became about, well, what's Clemson going to do? They done gone and lost a game they weren't supposed to lose. We paid millions of dollars for this entertaining sport. What are we going to do now? And he stayed there. He stayed there at that dark place until the next day when he was at church and his son was being baptized. And he stood up and he walked to the front of the church. And he did what some of us have done. He turned around and he looked at all the people sitting there. And you know what he saw? He saw his family sitting there, the people that he loved, that he had known his whole life. And then behind them he saw a whole church sitting there, saying yes to his son, saying, we claim you, we're going to be part of your family. And then standing on the back wall, he saw Deshaun Watson and every member of the Clemson football team, standing at attention almost, as if to say, we're in this with you too. We're here with you. That defeat yesterday can't even begin to compare to the victory that we claim together as a people. And whenever Dabo talks about this, he gets to the end of that talk and he just chokes up and he says, I don't even really know what to say about it. I know why that is. Because he's talking about joy. Deep joy, a joy that overshadows all of our anxieties. Things that might seem big at the moment, like a football game. And all it took was a little bit of water and a community of faith to help him see that there was something much bigger going on there. So Paul tells us, rejoice in the Lord always. Don't be anxious about anything. And then he finishes it out for us and he says, but give thanks for everything. My last story that I want to tell you is one that you're probably going to hear again this week. And it's a story about some bread and some wine. And it happened on the week that Jesus went to his crucifixion and death. And he's sitting in a room with his disciples, and he takes some bread, and he says to his disciples, this bread, it's like my body. It's going to be broken and torn and destroyed It's going to be given to you, though. And he takes this glass of wine and he says, this wine is like my blood. It's my life. It's who I am. It's all that I am. And it's going to be poured out and given to you. And he took that bread and that wine and he did something that we hear about all the time, but I don't know if we ever think about it. He gave thanks for it. He looked to God and he said, thank you. I've often wondered, did his voice crack when he did that? I think mine would. How can you give thanks in that moment? How can you say thank you over something so difficult, something so dark? Jesus, we sometimes think that Jesus is some kind of Superman. But he's not. Jesus has all of our limitations, all of our kryptonite. And he looks up to his Heavenly Father and he says, thank you. And he and his friends enjoyed one last supper together, one that we're going to celebrate later this week. And he leaves, and as he marches closer to the cross, it might seem as though all hope is fading. But Jesus keeps saying, not my will, Lord, but yours be done. And as he marches closer to the cross, it might seem as though hope has died. But Jesus says, no, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And as he marches closer to the cross, it can seem that there's nothing but darkness in the world. But Jesus walks trusting in God with each step, giving thanks. And God does what only God can do. God delivers in a way that only God can deliver, with joy. We call it an Easter joy. A joy that overcomes our fears, a joy that overcomes our anxieties, a joy that even overcomes death. Jesus trusts in God and brings joy to the entire creation. Amazing, amazing event. You sang about it earlier in Oh Happy Day. How about Oh Joyful Day? A joyful day that we still can see, that we still can hear. And so Paul writes to the church and says, rejoice in the Lord always. Don't be anxious for anything. Give thanks for everything. But I haven't told you one important part of that, I guess, which is that when Paul says all those things, he's writing them from a prison cell. He's sitting in a prison cell, writing to a church, giving them encouragement, trying to initiate the first generation of the Church of Christ with some energy, with some passion. But he's sitting in a prison cell, and I sometimes wonder, how can we be joyful? How can we be thankful? How can we let go of our anxieties when we're sitting in the prison cells of life? Because I think we all know that we can feel like we're in that kind of place from time to time. It might even happen when you're sitting in a classroom. I know it used to happen to me that way. It might happen in our relationships with each other. We can feel trapped sometimes. But Paul gives us the answer just a few verses earlier in his letter to the Philippians, when he says, I can do all things. Do all things. Not because of who I am, but because of what Christ did. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Because of what Christ did, I can be thankful even when the world tells me I don't have anything to be thankful for. Because of what Christ did, I don't have to let the anxieties that I feel every day rule me. Because of what Christ did, I can find joy in every moment, even in the moments when the fish don't seem to be biting. I can find joy in every moment that God has given me to be alive. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Amen.